restrictions in the various portfolios. Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula is currently briefing media on the lockdown regulations and the directives related to transport. Let's go straight there right now.
I'm still assisted by Ishmael on the telephone lines and Nongeba on the WhatsApp. And on the sign language, I'm assisted by Andiswa and Keta. In the panel today is the Minister of Transport, Minister Fikile Mbalula, and the Deputy Minister, Dikelezi Makatsi, and the Director General of Transport, Alec Muremi. At this point, I'd like to invite the Minister to come and address the media briefing.
Thank you, Director General, for our communications and GCIS, Ms. Pumla Williams, and congratulations on your new appointment of that important position in our government. I'm with, like Ms. Pumla said, with the DG, Mr. Alec Muremi. They call him Muremi because he was ramming in the Free State. But he's from Limpopo, Seshego, the proud talent of Seshego in Limpopo, a man in the province of Dzingidzingi. And then I'm with also the Deputy Minister, Ms. Dikeledi Makatsi, also from Limpopo. So this is Limpopo time in the Department of Transport. Ladies and gentlemen and viewers at home, in his address to the nation on the Sunday, President Ramaphosa announced that alert level for the whole country will be lowered from level 4 to level 3 with effect from 1 June 2020. The President further emphasized that we must get used to living with the coronavirus for some time to come. We must therefore internalize the new normal. We have consistently emphasized that working with civil society, with our people in general, we will redouble our efforts in ensuring that the transport sector is not responsible for the rapid spread of the virus. As the country moves to level 3, with more industries resuming operations, learners returning to school, the transport sector must be responsive to enable mobility of both workers and learners. We must at all times remember that this is a government readjusted approach that the President talked about from level 5, which was the total shutdown. We're moving downwards. So on a risk-by-risk analysis, we will then shift to different levels as we go on. And at all times, transport and all other ministries affected will have to make adjustments in this regard. In doing so, we must maintain a delicate balance between enabling mobility and arresting the spread of the virus. Our commitment to preservation of human life, above all else, is informed by our Constitution, which enjoins us in ensuring that the right to life is non-negotiable and therefore supersedes all other rights. The consultation we have held with industry bodies across various modes of transport have given us confidence that the majority of the sector is ready to resume operations with strict adherence to health protocols. Regulations published by the Minister of Cooperative Governance, which give effect to level 3, enjoins us to publish directions responsive to the gradual easing of the lockdown. The Minister of COGTA Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is leading the process in regard to the regulations and in particular the disaster management in our country. And in doing so, she's not working alone. She's working with an interministerial committee that report to the National Coronavirus Command Council led by the President. And then the Command Council is accountable to Cabinet. None of the decisions and regulations we publish and the directions I'm going to speak to today are without the rubber stamp of Cabinet of the Republic. The reopening of the schools and some institutions of higher learning in June require of us to put measures in place to enable safe movement of learners and students. Similarly, the increase in the number of people returning to work means more activity on our roads. Our level 3 directions, which come into effect on the 1st of June 2020, demonstrate the careful balancing act of enabling mobility while arresting the spread of the virus through the transport system. We have taken note of adversaries from the World Health Organization and the Department of Health discouraging the use of sanitizing booths due to health concerns. We will ensure that these are not utilized at our transport facilities. There are booths that have been advertised all around, and we in transport also, we have tested some of the booths which we wanted to use for convenience and new innovation as we roll out safety measures in transport centers in our country. The Department of Health, informed by the World Health Organizations, have informed us that it is not safe to use the booth in South Africa and the world over. So tough luck to those people who thought that is business. And so in this particular regard, they will have to look at other new means of innovation. Maritime transport, there will be no changes to the directions regulating the movement of ships. The ban on passenger vessels and cruise liners remain in place, and only vessels bringing in cargo are allowed to call on our ports. However, it is important to note that movement of cargo from our seaports to its final destination is allowed. Similarly, full operations for the Port of Mossel Bay and Port of Saldanha Bay for movement of cargo will be permitted. Furthermore, allowance will be made for South African registered seafarers to embark and disembark ships with mandatory quarantine for those returning. To this extent, the South African Maritime Safety Authority, SAMSA, shall be directed to issue a marine notice to this effect. Aviation, limited domestic air travel for business purposes will be allowed, subject to restrictions on the number of flights per day and authorization based on the reason for travel. The availability of port health services will also guide the scheduling of flights. The resumption of domestic flights will be rolled out in 3 phases. This phased approach will be guided by the following considerations: port health capacity at the Golden Triangle airports. The Golden Triangle airports is OR Tambo, Cape Town, and Kinshasa International Airport. Initial period will also serve as a trial period to stress test the system and measures to determine if they are holding up or not. Lanseria Airport to arrange port health capacity and government to certify it before any flight is allowed to take off or land. We will in this regard work closely with management of this privately owned airport to ensure that all the necessary measures are in place. A move to phase 2 is informed by the current low infection rates in the inland provinces. We will further engage with the industry stakeholders on the contributions that are necessary for port health capacity in the operations of phases 2 and 3 of the rollout. What it means is that the limited service will be provided in a triangular golden airports, which is OR Tambo, Cape Town International Airport, as well as Kinshasa. The rest of the smaller airports, pending on the capacity there, that will be rolled out in terms of port health. They will follow soon, probably at phase 2 of the rollout. And they'll be guided by the considerations of commercial aircraft movement, also will be allowed from these airports during each phase. On phase 1, OR Tambo Airport, Kinshasa, and Cape Town Airport, Lanseria International will be open. Phase 2, Kruger Mpumalanga International, Polokwane, and Bramfisher Airport will follow. Phase 3, Kimberley Airport, Uppington, East London Airport, Umtata, Port Elizabeth will follow at phase 3 of the opening up of the airlines. Guidelines to prevent the spread of the virus in civil aviation activities have been developed by the South African Civil Aviation Authority, and this will be implemented by the industry, with SACA playing an oversight role. We have evaluated the plans in full and have also considered the non-pharmaceutical interventions as well as mitigation strategies to be implemented by all airlines operating in our domestic markets, and are confident that they will assist in the containment of the spread of the virus. We have also assessed the measures being rolled out globally in the airline industry and benchmarked against this when an assessment was done by the Department of Transport on the state of readiness related to the aviation industry. Airports' limited domestic air travel also means that flights will only be allowed to depart and land at selected airports in a phased manner, as earlier explained. Only passengers will be allowed inside the terminal buildings. Therefore, no accompanying members of the public will be allowed inside the terminal buildings. Temperature screening will be conducted at the terminal building entrances before any passenger is allowed entry. We had envisaged booths and so on. Now, with the intervention of WHO and the Department of Health, there will be no booths, but there will be strict adherence to measures when you go to OR for business purposes to board a flight. You will be checked, and if there are anything that suggests otherwise, you will be taken care of accordingly in terms of the health measures of our country by port health. Just a point of emphasis, there's no need to go to airport to accompany anybody except if you drop off and then not enter the airport. So this thing of accompanying friends all around, and whilst you are not boarding the flight, for now, it is not ideal for anyone going to the airport. No passengers will be allowed inside the terminal buildings without masks. So all the time, you've got to have your mask on. AXA will ensure effectiveness of the sanitization process before entering the terminal buildings, which may result in the number of entrances being reduced. All the airports will have markings on the floor for social distancing of 1.5 meters. This will be applicable at check-in counters, security checkpoints, and airport lounges. All airline check-in agents will wear face shields, and the counters will be installed with protective screens. Check-in counters will also be frequently sanitized. All airport personnel will wear masks. Passengers are encouraged to use self-check-in to avoid queues at the airports. At boarding gates, boarding will be staggered and prioritized in terms of the number of passengers to board. Sectional boarding will be implemented to avoid unnecessary contact inside the aircraft. Inside the cabin, full capacity will be allowed. It must be noted that the risk of COVID-19 infection on board a commercial passenger airline is lower than in many other confined spaces. All our commercial aircrafts are fitted with high efficiency particulate air filters. It's something that I had during this week for the first time. But to explain it to you, it HEPA, it eat all the viruses, not only corona, any virus inside the aircraft. HEPA, finito. So there is HEPA. So don't compare airlines with taxis. So that we can have 100%. Let's be clear. HEPA is for airlines. Okay? Taxis, mask, and all of that. So quickly, there will be experts who are going to say, taxi and airline same. Go and ask Santaco. Their airline did not take off. So they will explain that better about this. So I'm just clarifying the point that be clear that 100% inside the airline, and then HEPA, high efficiency particulate filters, will be inside the airlines, all our airlines. These are manufactured to the same standard as those used in hospital operating theaters and industrial clean rooms, with the same efficacy of 99.97% in removing viruses. While the total air supply inside the cabin is essentially sterile and particle-free, the biggest risk is if someone enters or remains in that environment while unwell with a viral infection. This risk will be mitigated through the adoption of effective sanitization and personal hygiene protocols. Somebody gets into the airline, he's got coronavirus, he doesn't know. He passes the screen and the screen says he's pashasha, he's okay. But the guy is sick, he doesn't know. That will be mitigated by masking yourself inside, and then the HEPA, as well as other measures, sanitization, and so on. It is quite possible that you can sit in the presence of people who've got coronavirus, but they might not know, or you yourself, you will not know. And that is why we are encouraged when we get into spaces where you get to be in contact with people, you've got to take those measures very seriously. Very seriously. That is very important. The following measures will apply inside the cabin of the aircraft. No catering will be allowed inside the cabin. No magazines on board. Sawubona is gone. The last row will be reserved for isolation of suspected cases. You go around, we don't understand you. The last row at the back next to the toilets is reserved for you, right there. But it's important so that you are there and you are kept and you are attended accordingly. Or if you're not feeling well, that last row will be reserved for people and they will be taken care of accordingly. All aircrafts must be disinfected before entering into service and after each flight. Loading capacity for all airport buses will be limited to 70%. These buses must be disinfected after loading. Drivers, baggage handlers, and round handlers must be fully equipped with appropriate personal protective equipment. On arrival, all passengers must be screened as they enter the terminal building. Suspected cases must be referred to Port Health. The reason why we've got the triangular approach, you must understand, of Joburg, Cape Town, and Kinshasa is because all the other smaller airports don't have the Port Health capacity. So to open them up without that capacity is a total disaster. They will be opened up as and when we roll that capacity out and we do stress testing through these airports, because there are questions that will arise. Cape Town is an epicenter, Johannesburg and Durban. Why do you allow this to happen and then you don't allow flying in smaller airports? This is guided also by capacity, but we'll explain further as and when questions arise. On arrival, all passengers must be screened as they enter the terminal building. Suspected cases must be referred to Port Health. Aviation training. Aviation training organizations are allowed to conduct both virtual and in contact aviation training to students that are South African citizens and to foreign students that are ready in South Africa, subject to all applicable COVID-19 regulations and directions. Foreign students who are not within the borders of South Africa are allowed to only conduct virtual training. Additional authorization for training flights is not required, provided that the aircraft used is registered with an approved Part 141 Aviation Training Organization. Skills tests are allowed, provided that the examiner or instructor is authorized to conduct a flight test by the South African Civil Aviation Authority. General aviation operators will be required to develop and implement procedures consistent with applicable COVID-19 regulations and directions. RAID. When we presented level 4 directions, we indicated that commuter rail will resume operations gradually on an incremental basis based on detailed plans submitted by operators. Indeed, the Gautrain resumed its operations at the beginning of May 2020. As of 1st June 2020, the Gautrain will resume the airport service. Through our ongoing engagements and evaluation of PRASA's state of readiness to resume operations, we have concluded that PRASA is not ready to resume with the Metro Rail commuter services. We continue to work closely with PRASA in assessing each line and put measures in place to achieve an acceptable level of readiness. We have therefore revised our timelines in respect of the resumption of the Metro Rail commuter service. The revised target date is now 1st July 2020 on the following lines: Pretoria to Pienaarspruit, Cape Town to Simonstown, East London to Berlin, and Port Elizabeth to Uitenhage. Long distance trains remain prohibited. On public transport, we will answer further questions you may want to ask about PRASA. We do have plans which we have evaluated and we have looked at, like we do with all our sectors, maritime and as well as aviation. PRASA was ready to go on Monday, but we can't take that risk because you know there are thousands and thousands of commuters who depend on that. But equally, the numbers of people going to work, as much as they increase, they are not full 100%, so to say. So it has enabled us in terms of our planning to ensure that we utilize June to be ready, and at the same time we are confident that from July 1st, PRASA will be back on operations in those lines that I've actually explained. There is no time that we can allow people to be on top of each other. Omunye pos gomunye. That's not going to allow, because otherwise we will be opening a service simply to become a vehicle for spreading the virus. We can't allow that. So we have done this in the best interest of safety to ensure when we resume, we've got all the ingredients and the capacity necessary for us to guide the operations. And I'm confident that the 1st of June, we will be up to speed. On public transport, with the increase in the number of people returning to work and learners and students returning to institutions of learning, long-distance public transport crossing provincial, metropolitan or district boundaries is permitted to operate. The condition for such operation is that public transport vehicles are only permitted to transport persons permitted to travel between provinces in terms of the regulations. Such travel is only restricted to persons undertaking work responsibilities or performing a service permitted under Alert Level 3, provided they are in possession of the requisite permit. Persons moving to a new place of residence, persons caring for an immediate family member, learners or students who have to commute to and from those schools or institutions of higher learning during periods when those schools or institutions are permitted to operate. A practical example of that, it is Mpumalanga, KwaMhlanga, and Mamelodi Atshwane. It's an interprovincial travel, daily. So at the present moment, it is not allowed. So we're allowing that travel for people who are coming for school and at the same time going to work, and that interprovincial travel is allowed, not for visiting. If you want to visit your uncle and everybody, that is discouraged, only for purposes of work and business. That interprovincial travel will happen. So if police stop the taxi on the road and you are found to be traveling and you don't have a permit, you will then face the consequences of being offloaded, whatever that it is, because you will have been in direct contravention of the regulations. Interprovincial will be allowed for attendance of funerals, transportation of mortal remains, obtaining medical treatment, persons returning to their place of residence from a quarantine or isolation facility, movement of children, and members of parliament performing oversight responsibilities. The time restrictions on all road-based public transport modes are lifted. Public transport will now be allowed to operate throughout the day. However, capacity restrictions remain. Minibus taxis remain at 70% loading capacity. Buses must adhere to a maximum loading capacity of 50%, taking due regard of standing passengers. E-hailing and meter taxis remain at 50% loading capacity. Shuttle, chauffeur, and charter services remain at 50% loading capacity. Driver's license testing centers, vehicle testing centers, and provincial regulatory entities. All driver's license testing centers, DLTCs, vehicle testing centers, VTCs, and provincial regulatory entities. You would have seen during the week I was showcasing the safety measures that will be taken. this coming week in terms of the opening of the DLTCs. And the VTCs and the DLTCs have been conducting safety measures for all these centers throughout the country in preparation for the 1st of June. And I visited one of such centers in Centurion to showcase how the safety measures are going to be applied in the DLTCs and VTCs as they open on Monday. Subject to strict application of health norms and standards and their ability to pass the assessment on their state of readiness test conducted by the Road Traffic Management Corporation. In conclusion, we remain guided by the risk-adjusted approach of government and have taken a cautious approach to the measures easing the lockdown effects on transport. We will further continue with our engagement with the stakeholders, which we have done with all the stakeholders, with the exception, of course, of truck owners, which we will extend to over time in terms of engagement to find solutions to the difficult task at hand of balancing the competing interests and preservation of lives and supporting livelihoods. Thank you very much.